Welcome to the viewing and listening audience to this, the 8th meeting of the Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration. This is the committee's second hearing with stakeholders pursuant to its examination of unemployment during the COVID-19 pandemic and the state's capacity to provide support to persons who became unemployed as a result of the pandemic. Members of the public are invited to submit their comments on the Parliament's social media platforms, YouTube, ParlView, or via our Facebook and Twitter feeds. At this point, we'd like to advise you of our stakeholders with us today, including the Ministry of Labour, the Aviation, Communication and Allied Workers Union, the Amalgamated Workers Union, the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union, the Trinidad and Tobago Coalition of Service Industries, and the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association. At this point, I'm the chairman, Paul Richards. I'd like to invite members of the committee to please introduce themselves, starting with Member Beckles. Member Beckles.
Okay, sorry about that, Chair. Good morning again, everyone. Welcome. Penelope Beckles, Member of Parliament for Arima and Minister of Housing and Urban Development, member of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Sinanan. Member Sinanan. Let's go to Member Ford, where Member Sinan, so that takes you. Member Ford.
Yeah, hi, good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. Morning to you, Chairman, members of the committee, and all our invited guests. Esmond Ford, member of this committee.
Member Nakid.
Good morning to everyone. Thanks for coming to share with us and the country your hopefully a wealth of information and suggestions.
Thank you. Member Mohit.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, members of the committee. Vandana Mohit, Member of Parliament for Shibonasis. Looking forward. Thank you.
And welcome once again, Member Mohit, to the committee. We are happy to have you. We go back to Member Sinanan. And Member Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to Trinidad and Tobago. Good morning to the guests today. Looking forward to a very fruitful discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Avinash Singh, member.
Thank you. The other member is Member Roger Monroe, who is unable to be with us today. So we'd like to identify that. All right, thank you for joining us this morning again. We'd like to invite also in a short while our stakeholders, but to advise you at this time that this inquiry has 4 main objectives. 1, to examine the trends in unemployment and job losses in the private and public sectors during the COVID-19 pandemic. 2, to assess the unemployment relief strategies and programs of the state during the COVID-19 pandemic. 3, to examine the proposed strategies of the state to stimulate job creation and employment opportunities to counteract the adverse economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. And 4, to examine the changes in the operations of the private sector aimed at sustaining business during the COVID-19 pandemic. At this time, we'd like to invite the heads of our stakeholder groups to please introduce themselves and their teams, and also present a short 2-minute opening comment. And we will start with the Acting Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Labour, Ms. Natalie Willis.
Good morning, Chair and esteemed members of the committee. I am Natalie Willis, Acting Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Labour. With me this morning, attending virtually, is our head of our Labour Market Information Unit, Mr. Bruce Spencer, our Senior Legal Officer, Ms. Sangeeta Bundu, and our Chief Labor Relations Officer, Mr. Bino Gomez. Thank you, Chair and esteemed committee, for this opportunity to appear before you yet again. The Ministry of Labor is once again eager to have this privilege to engage with this committee, as well as representatives of the public and stakeholders, which ministry diligently serves by promoting decent work, equal opportunity, and a stable industrial relations climate. The ministry seeks meaningful and productive discussion on how it can continue to attend to the diverse needs and meet the evolving challenges of all our stakeholders in these trying times occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic. The ministry remains committed to ensuring that its policies and procedures reflect the government's people-centered concern for the well-being of the workforce and its role in maintaining the nation's economic stability. The team logged on here today reflects multiple areas of expertise, ranging from labor law, industrial relations, and statistical analysis, as well as the years of experience in delivering the ministry's mandate. We look forward to a fruitful discussion as we look into the effects of this terrible pandemic has had on our small nation, and in particular, the labor issues and employability. I thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's go now to the General Secretary of the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union, Mr. Trevor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as indicated, I'm the General Secretary of BIGWU, Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union. And with me this morning is the union's second Vice President, Comrade Jason Brown, who is very experienced in labor relations, appearing in matters before the Ministry of Labor and the Industrial Court, and of course at bilateral levels with many of the employers where we have representation of the workers. Our union is happy to be invited to this hearing this morning. Over the past year and a half or so, during this unprecedented pandemic, we would have had to address many issues, including that of some retrenchment in some of the areas where we represent workers. We would have had to deal with several industrial relation issues, some of which would have found their way either to the ministry or to the industrial court. We would have had to address several of the issues that employers themselves would have been grappling with, the issue of the vaccination in the workplace. Some workers would have willingly taken the vaccine, others for various reasons would have not, and we would have had to address that either way. We would have also worked with the Joint Trade Union Movement and the other labor federations, including the National Trade Union Center and the Federation of Independent Trade Unions, as we sought to get some level of cohesion in terms of the trade union response to the pandemic and the employment issues that would have resulted therefrom. So just to conclude, BIGWU is happy to be here, and in whatever way we could give responses and assist this hearing, we would be quite willing to do so. So thank you again, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. We move now to Mr. Peter Farmer, General Secretary, or Secretary General, sorry, of the Aviation, Communication and Allied Workers Union. Mr. Farmer.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, other members of the committee and other participants. The JSC on Social Services and Public Administration had embarked on an initiative to examine employment during the COVID-19 pandemic and the government's capacity to provide support to those who became unemployed as a result. The Aviation, Communication and Allied Workers Union was identified by the committee as a key stakeholder in the inquiry, and we were asked to submit written responses, which we did, to a number of questions which the committee thought would be useful in the inquiry. The workers we represent are almost solely from the aviation industry, and in particular, Caribbean Airlines Limited. Caribbean Airlines is a state enterprise, and it forms a significant part of government's machinery. As a government-owned corporation, it therefore acts as an instrumentality or agency of government on industrial policy. And it is only because of the specifics or the specialities of the functions that CAL performs that they are not carried out by government's public servants. It follows, therefore, that because government is acting through the instrumentality or agency of CAL, that its officers should be subject to the same limitations that would be placed on government officers. For instance, the government office, the government cannot choose to exclude persons by discrimination. We say all that because when it comes to a state enterprise, the question is not only whether government had the capacity to support those who became unemployed, but rather whether the instrumentalities or the agents of government, that is the executive management and managers of the human resources departments, acted in a manner that demonstrated some sort of legal rectitude. For example, in the case of CAL, when they chose rather than implement a system of rotation to exclusively retain some workers and lay off others, or while workers are on layoff, advertise jobs publicly that fell within relative bargaining units. In the case of the in-flight department alone, there were about 140 workers who were placed on unpaid layoff for 12 months, while an equal number were kept on duty with salary cuts of 5%. What is even more egregious is the fact that these laid-off workers, having applied for state relief, have not received any payments to date. There are other alleged issues, some of which we have mentioned, that need to be looked at in detail. It will only augur well for your endeavor and hopefully to the long-term good of our, by challenging the principles of state enterprises to reconsider the perception of themselves and their jobs. ACAWU wishes to suggest that this committee facilitates a platform through which workers could anonymously, if they so wish, record their experiences with their employers. This, we feel, may be a good way of capturing an alternative snapshot of the realities of life during the COVID-19 pandemic. It may not necessarily have to be part of this present exercise. We close our introductory remarks with words from Bhagwati from the Supreme Court of India, where he said, where cooperation is an instrumentality or an agency of government, it would be subject to the same constitutional or public limitations as government. The rule inhibiting arbitrary action must apply equally, and it cannot act arbitrarily. Its action must be in conformity with some principles which meet the test of reason and relevance. We thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Farmer. Quite a lot to digest there. So we get into disaggregating that as our morning continues. Let's go now to Mr. Michael Prentice, President General of the Amalgamated Workers Union. Mr. Prentice. Okay, we go to then Mr. Mark Edgehill, President of the TNT Coalition of Services Industries. Mr. Edgehill.
Good morning, Chair and members. Thank you very much. I'm Mark Edgehill, President of the Trinidad and Tobago Coalition of Services Industries and the Association of Real Estate Agents of Trinidad and Tobago. And I also am accompanied this morning virtually by our CEO of the TTCSI, Mr. Gavashti Gaidin. First and foremost, I would like to thank you for including the TTCSI, the Coalition of Services Industries, in this discussion today. TTCSI was established in October 2006 as an umbrella organization that brings together all services organizations and associations in Trinidad and Tobago. As an alliance of professional services associations, and organizations, the TTCSI functions as a focal point to lobby, channel, and address trade in services issues and services development issues, which are critical for the sector to thrive in this competitive global environment and for the growth of sustainable services in the economy, which contributed over 58% to real GDP in 2018. TTCSI has been recognized as the sole umbrella organization for services sector in the country and currently represents 56 member associations, which together account for 650 members, or 650,000 members, which is approximately 50% of our population. The majority of our members have been heavily impacted by the pandemic, hence the reason why we welcome this invitation to bring to the fore issues impacting services providers and firms in the country. And we look forward to bridging the gap between government and the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Etche. Let's go to Mr. George Naimi, Director of the TNT Manufacturers Association. Mr. Naimi?
Unmute. Yeah, just 1 second. Let me get the screen up. Morning. George Naimi, Director of the TTMA, Chair of the Stand Committee for Trails. And thank you for inviting us today. My opening remarks are scripted. The TTMA wishes to thank social services and public administration for inviting members of the TTMA to attend this very important consultative process. TTMA has and continues to be a great advocate in moving our economy forward. And we see this consultative process as a means towards that end, moving TT forward. TTMA has worked with the government in a number of PPP type arrangements, most notably the Vaccinate to Operate initiative, where we assisted in getting over 40,000 jobs in the hands of willing and deserving persons from the business community. Further, the TTMA worked with the government with regard to the roadmap to recovery, where many recommendations were put forward, not only to assist companies, but their workers as well. We are heartened that some considerations were given to the preservation of lives and livelihoods emanating from the road to recovery recommendations. In this regard, we are here as practitioners from the business community to answer questions you may have on the way our economy, what worked optimally and what did not work optimally, what tweaking can or should be done to existing frameworks, and most importantly, what is needed to continue to place us along that path of normalcy. We're all striving for both our businesses and our most valued resource, our employees. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Naimi. Mr. Prentice, Michael Prentice, President General of the Amalgamated Workers Union, are you ready? Mr. Prentice? Okay, we'd have to come back to Mr. Prentice. All right, thank you all so much for being with us. We'd like to remind both committee members and officials to direct their questions through me, the chair, and the chairman will also remind members to activate your microphone when you're called upon to make a contribution or when you'd like to make a contribution. And if you have if you've completed it, please turn it off and make sure that you are aware that you're on camera at any point. So be aware of your background, etc. Let's jump right into, we have a couple of members who would have to leave us in a short while. So let me go straight to Member Beckles for the first round of questioning. Member Beckles, go ahead, please.
Chair, so that bearing in mind that the president of the Amalgamated Workers isn't here, should I still go ahead or?
Yes, I didn't realize that.
Yes, so.
You can go to the coalition services, the question. The other set of questions you have, please. Thank you.
Just give me 1 minute.
Yeah.
Okay, right. So I would like to inquire whether the Ministry of Labor can indicate the reasons for the delay in the implementation of these policies. And that is the submission indicated that sectors most adversely affected by the employment terminations included arts, entertainment, tourism, manufacturing, and construction. Have there been any employment gains in the sectors that fall under your organization?
Ministry of Labor.
This is for the coalition, correct?
Yes, yes.
Yes, sorry, coalition, sorry.
Good morning, Minister.
Yes.
Thank you for your question as well. We have one of the issues that we've had with respect to the grants and the unemployment situation has been the accessibility of the grants, because a lot of operators are non-compliant based on the fact that they are single operators or small business owners. So they do not comply with all statutory requirements that have been stated as requirements to access grants or funding. That being one, of course, in terms of increases in labor, once the sectors have been reopened, people are getting back to work. However, some areas still have not been reopened, for example, the tour operators and parts of the tourism sector. This, as a result, is still impacting those sectors negatively. And those individuals have not been able to access grants for the same reason, lack of compliance with statutory requirements. So that is an issue that we have been discussing and have raised with the Ministry of Trade. We also have an issue, or had an issue that we raised, whereby the grants were made available to some in some sectors, but not all. And I'll give one instance with respect to pest control management, for example. Because they were considered an essential service, their employees, when they were laid off or suspended from work, were not able to access salary grants because they were considered in a sector being essential. What happened is, because businesses were closed, the business of the pest control sector was affected, and therefore their need for employment was not there. So they reduced their numbers of employees, and as a result, those employees needed access to salary grants, but were denied because the sector they work in was considered essential. So that's an oversight of things that are going on that are creating problems with respect to assistance and aid for persons in the various sectors. With respect to the tour operators, as I mentioned, because you raised the arts and entertainment and tour operators and tourism and so on, there are sites in Trinidad that can be operated safely. The tour operators have established protocols that have been approved by CAFA. They have the ability to operate safely by controlling numbers. But again, we've been trying to bridge the gap between them and government so that they can understand that they are able to operate safely, so they can reopen and get back to work.
Click on it.
Member Beckers, go ahead again, please.
Yes, I just wanted to, can I ask a quick follow-up on that?
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, because I just wanted to ask, maybe it might be a simple question, but what is your procedure for the application for the grants? Is it done online? Can it also be done in person? And do you find that you have a good response in terms of those who are accessing it?
This is for me again, correct?
Yes, please.
And Vashti, our CEO, can also step in when I'm done, if you wish. The access, yes, it can be done online. And the feedback, one of the issues that I've heard is, for example, when the last lockdown was initiated, the first day of work, or should I say the last day of work, would have been April 29th. So the grant was stated to start from the following Monday if you were unemployed, if you lost your employment from the 1st of May. We had people who their last day of pay was the 29th of April. So when they put in their application stating that their last working day was the 29th, they were denied salary grants because they did not lose their job on the 1st of May. And I mean, that is something that is completely ridiculous because they were unemployed from that date. They did not become unemployed from that date. Okay, so we need some clarity and some corrective measures taken in that regard, because a lot of people, because of that, were not able to access grants. The first tranche of grants from 2020, people did see their grants coming in. 2021, however, I think less than 10% of people that have applied have received their grants.
Rebecca, do you have a follow-up before we go to Member Naked?
No, I don't have a follow-up.
Member Naked, go ahead, please. Member Naked, go ahead, please.
Mr. Edgel, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
You addressed two oversights. Well, one an oversight and one probably something that sounds like a nightmare. But what solution did you all attempt to provide for these workers? What happened? What was the procedure when you realized that this oversight was happening? What did you all do then to find the solution?
So again, one of the first things we did was make it known to Ministry of Trade, which is our line ministry. What we do need to understand is that we don't have the ability to give relief to these people through our association, but we have to link them with the right institutions to do so. So we are the link in information to get things sorted out for them, but they have not been able to receive relief in that regard. The other thing, or should I say the main approach that the TTCSI took to try and alleviate the situation was to work with people who were not compliant to educate them and assist them in building structure for their organization or their business so that they can become compliant with regard to what the requirements were for applying for these grants. Because they were denied, they were not meeting the requirements. So obviously they needed to understand what was required of them and the steps they needed to take to become compliant.
And a final question, Chairman. Do you have any idea how many workers, given these two oversights that you mentioned, how many workers were directly affected, approximately?
That, let me bring in my CEO, Vashti Gaidin, who handles our statistics and data collection. She may have that information. Vashti,
absolutely, Ms. Gaidin, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, we are in the process. The reports that we submitted, these reports were completed during the period May 2020. On the request for this committee, we are in the process of compiling new data. And I'm sure you appreciate that the situation is flexible, it's fluid. So if we look at the tourism sector, roughly 75% of those businesses have been closed. So on a subsector level, we will be able to supply that data by the end of this year to the committee.
Thank you. Just before I go to Member Mohit for questions to the coalition, and could Mr. Prentice stand by, please? Your chairman, your president director, sorry, that you represent about 650,000 persons in the services sector.
Yeah.
Can you give us a sense, even from your initial assessment, what percentage of that would have been affected by unemployment, even though some may have started resuming their employment when the country reopened a couple of weeks ago?
Again, I think the best person to answer that would be the CEO.
Absolutely, not a problem.
She's our numbers expert.
Well, I'm glad you brought her, Ms. Gaidin.
Sure, Chair. So let me just break down. We broke down the sectors in terms of the sectors that were facing stay-at-home work orders and the vulnerable sectors. So this is arts, entertainment, recreational services, or we loop them into the cultural and creative sector, roughly 75% of that sector has been impacted. Sports services, personal care, between the period of the first stay-at-home work order from March 31st, 2020 to this year, they were out of commission. They have now been able to resume operations. Daycare services is currently closed. Tourism services, again, roughly 75 to 85% have been impacted. Those total numbers we will have for the committee by the end of this year.
Thank you so much. Just before I go to Member Mohet, Mr. Prentice, can you do your introduction, please? Mr. Michael Prentice, President General of the Amalgamated Workers Union. Go ahead, please. Mr. Prentice.
Workers Union. Good morning.
We're hearing you. Go ahead, please.
Okay, good morning. President General Michael Prentice of the Amalgamated Workers Union. At this time, I want to sincerely apologize in the first instance for my General Secretary, who at this time is unable to log in because her computer went down this morning. Nevertheless, I just want to point out the fact that as the Amalgamated Workers Union, we represent workers in a number of industries, both private and public sector. The Bermuda's Biscuit Company Limited. We also represent workers at the Royal Castle group of companies. We also represent workers in the Port of Spain Corporation and Eastside and New City Mall. What we would have challenges during this time. Fortunately for, in some areas, the public sector workers wasn't affected in a huge way as it would have affected workers in the private sector. The private sector would have been hit extremely hard because we was able to have communication in the corporation and so discussing the challenges that was facing the workers in that industry. In the Bermuda sector, we would have also had challenges here, a number of challenges there that would have brought forward and created issues and challenges for all of us. At this juncture, I am saying that as it relates to the Royal Castle workers, what the union would have done in order to assist in cushioning some of the challenges that we would have faced there is suspend our union dues and things like that in order to assist the workers in that industry, because the workers in that industry would have sought to get benefits. Some of what was provided by the state in terms of food cards and hampers and so on in that industry, and they will have faced a number of challenges. We are extremely thankful at this time to be invited to this meeting today, and we hope that we would be able to make some measure of contribution as it relates to the challenges that we are now facing. Unprecedented situation for all of us, first time facing this, and I hope today we will be able to make some contribution in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Prentice. Just before I go to Member Mohit for questions following up for the Trinidad Tobago Coalition of Services Industries, can Mr. Edgehill or Ms. Gayadine identify what percentage of your membership, and it may come in the document that you present at the end of the year, would have faced challenges receiving support due to compliance issues? Ms. Gayadine?
Sure. I cannot quantify the numbers because I'm a researcher, so I like to be precise. But again, I would have to go back to the sectors that have been contacting us, and that's the cultural and creative industries. And I am a person who likes to see there's a silver lining in everything. And the pandemic, the silver lining for the pandemic for the cultural and creative industries is that most of these operators are seeing the need to become compliant and register their businesses.
But from the coalition's perspective, do you see that there had been a serious gap before in terms of them understanding those compliance requirements as part of a going concern, a business in the framework of Trinidad today, not only to receive grants, because that's part of it, but just being part of operating a business properly in this sort of framework. And being formalized in the space, so to speak.
Chair, that has indeed been the situation where they are reaching out to us to assist them in becoming registered. And it's not just for grants. I wish to add, going back to members, Beckel's question, most of our members, they are not just looking at grants, they're not looking for a handout, but they are looking for strategies to build back better. And I'll give you an example of the tourism operators. What they have put forward to us is that they want to plan a comprehensive staycation campaign. And that staycation campaign must involve a virtual element. So it's not just getting the protocols in place for domestic tourism, but as well as marketing of, if you have a virtual campaign, you can also market our services and products for an international market so that we can attract new visitors to the destination when we do open back.
Thank you. Member Mohit, go ahead, please.
Chair, if I can add quickly, apologies.
Please, no, go ahead, and then Member Mohit. Go ahead, please, Mr. Edgel.
What I can add to that is one of the reasons why staycation tourism is one of the things that need to be addressed. It's an opportunity that the tour operators, for example, are looking at for preparation for international visitors. So to put the protocols into use now so that any glitches or hiccups can be addressed prior to the reopening of the larger international tourism market.
Thank you. Member Mohit, go ahead, please.
Chair, may I ask, are we in coalition?
Yes, we are.
Yes. Mr. Chair, I'd just like to direct a question on whether there have been any employment gains in the sector that fall under the organization, TTCSI, in terms of those who were adversely affected by employment termination, such as entertainment, tourism, manufacturing, and construction.
Good morning, member. Firstly, what I can say, again, Vashti will assist with some statistical information there. What I can say is that some of the sectors that saw gains would have been the IT and online type businesses. We've seen pivoting of many other service businesses to an online presence as well. So the increase or employment in that area has been a focus of growth. Reason being people that may have been in other positions would have to have transitioned into operating in a role that would have been geared towards the online, the doing of business online for that particular sector. I think Vashti, if you want to jump in with what statistics you have on the increase since the reopening.
Sure. Thank you, President. Chair, we have seen one of the sectors that have been able to flourish during this period is the business and professional services. And this has been a sector that it comprises of consultants, IT professionals, architects. It's a full gambit of professional services. And this sector has been able, these persons have been able to utilize technology to bid for international projects. So whereby we had consultants telling us pre-COVID, they would have been able to bid for one contract, which means that they had to travel. Now they are able to get 4 to 5 projects per annum. Secondly, in terms of the business and professional services, what TTCSI has done, the sectors who have demonstrated that they are going to focus on new markets. Earlier this year, to September 3rd to be precise, we launched our Go Global TT Services campaign. So those sectors, that have the ability to win new markets. Under the Gateway to Trade program, we are putting them through a rigorous 9-month program whereby we are assisting them in development of their export plan in terms of marketing, website development, as well as export. We are collaborating with Export TTU to do the market connections for these firms. We are targeting 80 firms in the first instance.
Mohit, you have a follow-up? Member Mohit, do you have a follow-up? All right, Member Ford, your hand is up. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. And good morning again to our panel out there. My question this morning really hinges around, again, it's a question, Chairman, that when each particular representative from the various entities we have there are given the opportunity to speak, I would like to hear from them, basically, what have they done as a trade union, as a coalition, as a grouping for their membership during the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Starting with Mr. Edgel, who we basically have heard from, right? We heard that, there were some relief situations, right? He mentioned he has about 600 persons in his membership, and 75% of them were being impacted. But my question is to Mr. Edgel, and also his CEO there, Ms. Gayadeen, is as a group, as an entity, as a coalition, what have you all done in order to assist the government of Trinidad and Tobago in putting out and assisting your membership during this period of pandemic? We heard you all spoke about, yes, the salary relief grants, the NAMDEFCO hampers, the food cards, all the various things that the government would have put out, all the banking loans being subsidized and so on by the government. I would like to know what you all have done in order to assist the government during this period of pandemic. And Mr. Chairman, at least this question also can go for all the participants when they have their turn to say something. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. So, Chair, can I go ahead?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So the TTCSI, as I mentioned, was a point of contact for lobbying the government and assisting government in getting information back to our membership. The TTCSI was involved with the American Chamber and the TT Chamber with the vaccination drive at Napa. We have the consultations with many of our members. I mean, we've had roundtable discussions with our presidents of the associations that we represent to identify where they were having difficulties, and all that information was compiled and supplied or furnished to the Ministry of Trade. So the transfer of information was our main point of contact, obviously, because we can't provide funding for relief. So we have to provide the guidance and the service to assist them in not only becoming compliant to access the available options that they have, but also one of the main focuses that we have had was lobbying to government to prove certain sectors can actually get back to work, that sectors have protocols established, that protocols have been approved by the Ministry of Health and CARFA. And we're still in that trend. We're still in that phase. Right now, we are actually focused on the tourism sector for that reason. We have dealt with the yacht services sector. We have dealt with the real estate sector as well, all of which have protocols established to operate safely, and we've been able to get them reopened. So the TTCSI has been very active. I mean, I would say that, I mean, I took up the position in April of this year, it was not supposed to be a very demanding job, but because of the lockdowns and the pandemic, it has been practically a full-time job because of the amount of activity in working with our membership and trying to facilitate the assistance that our membership, is looking for, just for them to get back to work so they can survive.
Thank you. Just before we go to the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union, I know...
Just a little follow-up. One little follow-up. quick question to Mr. Edgell. His membership, do they pay a subscription fee or anything towards the coalition?
Right. So we collect a very small pittance from our member associations. So we don't benefit from the 650,000 individuals. We benefit from the associations that they are members of. So the 58 member associations that we represent, they each pay $900 a month. So it's not a significant amount, and we do need a lot more to do the work that we have been doing to actually facilitate better growth in the sector. And we're doing everything we can right now to justify that also. Ms. Guiding can also jump in with some additional information.
Chair, if I could just correct that, it's 900 per annum.
Okay, thank you.
And,
just before we,
thank Chair, you. If I could just answer members for at.
I'm going to ask you to hold that, Ms. Guiding, for a second, because we really want to get through some of the other groups effectively in terms of time management. So we may come back to that. But before we go to the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union, I know Member Mohit had a question, and then we'll go to Member Singh for his question to the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union. So Member Mohit, your final question for the coalition, and then we go to Member Singh.
Sure, thank you, Chairman. Chairman, can we have some light, placed on or shedded when it comes to vaccination policy for the TTCI?
So I will let Vashti deal with that. And in terms of what, Vashti, hearing me?
Ms. Guardian, go ahead, please.
President, about vaccination, I know that this is your area of expertise.
All right, I'll go back to that then. We have been in support of, when coming to vaccination and policies, the membership has been split pretty much down the middle in terms of those for vaccine mandates and those against vaccine mandate. So with regard to the policy, we are in support of what the TT Chamber, AmCham, all these other organizations have come together, the joint chambers, Ministry of Energy, etc., in terms of looking for the formulation of a working industrial relations policy for the vaccination. So I believe, in my personal opinion, I believe the vaccination requirements will differ based on the type of operations. So it is something that will need to be looked at by sector and by specific business operations. So there are areas that it may be required to be mandatory because of the significance or the type of work environment, whereas there are others that may not. So I think it is something that needs to be looked at carefully and not something that can be dealt with in terms of putting a blanket decision across.
Mr. Edgell, just to the Acting Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Labour, Ms. Willis, what's the progress status on the draft workplace vaccination policy from the ministry, if there's one? And then we'll go to Member Singh for the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union. So Acting PS Willis, is there a draft policy on the way?
A draft paper on a possible vaccination policy would have been developed by the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee, which is a committee established under the Industrial Relations Act and provides guidance to the Minister of Labour. That committee, which is multi-partite in nature, would have looked at the issue and prepared a paper and guidelines, and those two papers or those two documents are before Cabinet at this time.
Is there a framework you can share with us?
I will ask my senior legal officer, who is also a member of the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee, to indicate whether there is such.
And a general approach. Thank you so much. Go ahead, please.
Ms. Bundu?
Thank you, PS. Thank you, PS. Morning, Chair and members of the committee. At this point in time, the framework includes consultations with workers and employer organizations in respect of how any such policy with respect to vaccination would affect not only the workplaces and their operational requirements, but also with respect to enforcement of any such policy and the role of employers and trade unions in supporting the enforcement of any such policy should it come to light. So that is the framework that we have utilized in keeping with our typical practices on the development of policy. It is intended that once Cabinet gives us a directive in terms of how we are to move forward, our stakeholders, not just trade unions and employers, but our multipartite stakeholders would also be given an opportunity to provide comments and guidance and qualitative and quantitative information where they can to assist us in finalizing that document.
Thank you. As part of the consideration, just before we go to Mr. Peter Farmer, Ms. Bondu, the part of a conversation on the employer's responsibility to ensure a safe workplace in the context of COVID-19 and vaccination is part of that, the framework consideration, and what the OSH Act may have to, how the OSH Act may have to inform that?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that is in fact an important consideration. Treatment of the coronavirus as a workplace safety and health issue. The relevant provisions under the OSH Act were examined, not only with respect to the employer's obligations and responsibilities, but the employees and the context in which the refusal to work right may be exercised in such a situation.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer, and then Member Singh.
Yeah, this
Mr.
question
Peter
is from, hi, this question is for Mr. Edgell. And I was wondering if Caribbean Airlines happens to be a member of his organization. And as a matter of fact, if any of the other airlines have contacted him or his organization with respect to synergies that may be developed so that they can get people back to work, and also the airlines providing travelers and so on and delivering to his members. I would like to know if there has been any sort of connection there.
Thank you for your question, member.
Thank you.
So to answer the question, to my knowledge, no. However, it is very coincidental that not only are you asking the question, but that you are in this meeting this morning as well, because we have been going through an exercise identifying what organizations are in existence in the country, what sectors are not currently properly represented by a structured association. And one of these associations or groups and sectors that I've asked my CEO to actually look into for us to engage is the aviation services sector. So it is something that we are looking at. We have not gotten there yet. We're actually dealing with a lot of issues on the side of getting people back to work still. But definitely aviation is one of the areas that we do need to look at, because I think there's a lot of opportunity there. In terms of Caribbean Airlines collaboration, we have not had anything as yet, but we are open to discussions, obviously. So I hope that answers your question, and I hope that it opens the door for us to actually have some more collaboration going forward.
I can see that we're going to have a lot more interface with the coalition sector moving forward. Let's go to the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union. Member Singh, go ahead, please. And then Member Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to pose two questions to the Banking, Insurance and General Insurance Workers Union, if I may. The first question to BIGWU is your union satisfied with the policy proposals, guidelines and advisory services that are being provided by the Ministry of Labour to stakeholders? And this is really in response to the unique industrial relation issues generated from COVID-19. Should I also pose the second question, Mr. Chair, one time?
Yes, please.
Right. And the second question to BIGWU would be, I saw that you have indicated that BIGWU met with employers and other stakeholders to make recommendations and to seek clarification, given that this pandemic has affected the country and, members in an unprecedented way. I would like to know if you can identify some of these recommendations that emerged from those meetings. So over to you, Chair. Thank you.
Go ahead, please. Officials from BIGWU, Mr. Johnson.
Yes, Chair. Let me perhaps what is in my memory in terms of the second question in particular, and I'll ask my colleague, comrade Jason Brown, to also assist with part of the first question, which I think had to do with are we satisfied with what is coming out of the Ministry of Labor in terms of guidelines, etc., to assist us. With respect to the, so I'm just taking the second question first in terms of meeting with stakeholders, etc. That has not been so much an individual exercise with our union alone, but we have teamed up with, for example, the joint trade union movement. We are an affiliate of the joint trade union movement. And the joint trade union movement has been together as well, been working with the other trade union federations. So that is the National Trade Union Center and the Federation of Independent Trade Unions. So yes, together, because the trade union movement, as far as possible, in order to create some synergies, have tried to see if we can operate as a team. We have met, for example, with the joint chambers of commerce. That would have been a couple months ago, when we were looking at this whole issue of when this issue of the vaccination in the workplace, mandatory vaccinations, was becoming a sort of topical discussion. And we would have met with the chambers in order to see if we can, first of all, put our position forward, and also to see if we can work with them in terms of to get to some position where we can have businesses reopening, etc. So we did have one meeting with them. That meeting was actually facilitated by the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies, another key stakeholder in this process. And we would have also met with, for example, the Employers Consultative Association, also to see whether we can have some sort of synergies of understanding because of the unprecedented nature of this pandemic. It is fair to say that these organizations, the chambers of commerce, the employers consultative body, and ourselves, of course, would have differed on several areas, but we felt it was necessary to put those differences aside and try to see where we can have common ground. One of the areas of common ground at the time was that the parties agreed that mandatory workplace vaccinations was not at the time the way to go. The strong focus would have been on, for example, looking at how we could enforce protocols in the workplace, the typical things being advised by the Ministry of Health, etc. We would have also looked to see what areas the parties can come together with. So, for example, in BIGWU has been able to stave off areas where there was going to be retrenchment, and we have been able to work with or have dialogue with the employers to try to keep that at a minimal. So we have not had a significant amount of retrenchment in the areas where we represent workers, which is over 80 organizations in Trinidad and Tobago. There have been some, but I think as a result of dialogue and discussion with the various employers, we have been able to, for now, been able to keep that at bay. And that was one of the key areas in terms of our objective, in terms of keeping people on the job or keeping people in work, so to say. So
Mr. Johnson, if I could just interrupt you, just to get some clarity. Two issues. One, the issue of retrenchment or furlough, and the issue of the mandatory vaccination. Is it part of the challenge that you and maybe other unions are facing? Is, for example, with your union, you represent such a wide cross-section of sectors. You represent banking, media, retail and supermarkets, regulatory, and energy. And to me, it seems counterintuitive to think that all these sectors can benefit from the same policy decision or the same approaches. One, some may argue the financial sector did not necessarily suffer financially during the pandemic. Some financial sector organizations made more money because, well, people went online and had to get a lot more stuff online. So they didn't necessarily, they had to pivot, but they didn't financially suffer. Media contracted. I'm a member of the media. I know many media houses contracted because advertising went down, retail went down. When retail goes down, advertising goes down. So it's part of the challenge as a union, and this may be evident in other unions, trying to have a one plaster for everything when different sectors may require different approaches, even under the same umbrella union. And what were your recommendations coming out of that sort of experience?
Okay, yes, the observations you have made, Chair, are fairly correct. For example, the banking sector, and it's obvious, it's public, they continue to make a fair amount of profit. So they have not been impacted. So we have not really had retrenchment in that sector per se.
But that doesn't mean that employees in some sectors weren't more exposed, because operations continued and they had to interface, for example, in True Value supermarkets, in the banking sector, with the general public, exposing them more to possible COVID exposure. So there are different scenarios with different sectors.
Yes, that is correct. And we have had to, yes, it was not a matter of a one size or one plaster fits all for the record, because we had key challenges in area like the retail sector, True Value supermarket. We have had to have many interventions there, because part of the challenge of this COVID engagement we have had is where you have employers trying to implement what they consider to be solutions, but without necessarily seeking to engage either the workers or the trade union. And we have had to have many interventions, whether it was employers seeking to change hours of work or change some sort of operational policy, which would have impacted the workers in the workplace. So what I'd like to do is also, if I could just be permitted to have my colleague, Comrade
Please do.
Just step in a bit and share perspective on the two questions asked. Yeah.
Absolutely. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Chair. Just to add to the last contribution made by Comrade Johnson. Yes, there can be different solutions based on the uniqueness of certain companies, but the union was able, as a body, as a representative body, to send out guidelines to all 75 or more of our branches regarding the generic things, regarding how it is you have to operate during the pandemic, the health hazards, when the vaccination came out, what were your rights and what were your responsibilities, things that you should do to contact the union. And after having guided them on those broad perspectives, what we would have sought to do was to meet with the employees, to meet with the members, to determine what were the unique issues that they were having based on the particular sectors that they were in, and then go to those particular sectors and meet with the employers to represent them specifically to try to resolve those issues. To deal with the first question, I believe, that was raised regarding satisfaction, regarding guidance coming out of the Ministry of Labor, I prefer not to deal with it in terms of satisfactory or unsatisfactory, but to report objectively as to what had happened. When the pandemic emerged in March of 2020, the term pandemic leave was a broad term that was being used regularly, and the population absorbed it. But when it was absorbed by the population, no further guidance came out as to how it was supposed to be administered. And what you had was employees and employers involved in basically a tailspin as to how to administrate this thing, because you were having people with different issues. Were you a primary contact? Were you a secondary contact? Were you symptomatic, but not necessarily tested positive? And therefore, you had to juxtapose pandemic leave against all the other types of leave that you have in the collective agreements, which is vacation leave, sick leave, uncertified or certified.
But just for clarity, The term pandemic leave was first, if my memory serves me correct, propagated by then Minister of Labour Jennifer Baptiste Primus and shut down publicly by the Prime Minister. So was it ever an official classification of leave, although it was being bandied about in the public narrative?
Well, this is the issue, because by the time it was birthed to the time it was shut down, it was a sufficient time to create an expectation from workers that, listen, a new category of leave could be reasonably created to accommodate these situations that were caused by the pandemic. Like I said, the different levels of exposure and so. And therefore, what it caused to happen after was to begin another set of negotiations between the union and the companies that we have recognized majority for, to now apply what was in the collective agreement creatively to allow people to get paid. Because remember, at that point in time, the mandate was the protection of the protection of lives and livelihood in that order. So while it is people had to stay at home, people also had to sustain themselves and their families economically. And you had challenges with the union trying to ensure that these people could stay at home but still remain paid, because some employers was looking at it from a perspective, fine, you can stay home, but we're not going to pay you. And that was a challenge. And then subsequent to that, there was the statement, to use your phrase, bandied about vaccinate to operate, just around the time of that the vaccinations were available. And then without that guideline that someone would have asked about it, I believe it was you, Chair, as to the status as to where that is right now in terms of being available for public consumption and guidance. When that came about, you had an issue now where large employers, the largest bank in the country, using that and other issues only known to them at this point in time, unilaterally taking decisions where it is, you have to be vaccinated to continue to work in their employ. And if not, you are going to have to provide them with a PCR test at your expense, which is unaffordable by these workers. So in the absence, all that to say, in the absence of this policy that you have just asked about from the Ministry of Labor, the trade unions are left to start from scratch with collective bargaining.
But can you guide, and the other unions can also advise on this? Were there consultations with the majority representative unions on these kinds of decisions to changes in terms and conditions, even though everyone was pivoting in emergency mode? Because these, I would use the word imposition loosely, because in many cases, it was a mandate from the company to the employees. Started encouraging, or in some instances, forcing employees to use their vacation and/or casual leave to take up when they were either on quarantine for exposure or not, and using up that time, and then not having an option for whatever this pandemic leave situation was, in terms of how their terms and contracts were affected by the employer.
Well, you see, consultation has a meaning. And what I would want people to understand, unfortunately, is that some employers use consultation in a very cosmetic sense. I can call you in the morning and tell you that I want to discuss something with you. And after having discussed something with you, as in one case on the 6th of August, 2021, implemented 10 days later without having any further discussion and or agreement with you as to how this thing is going to impact the workforce and how it is going to raise the level of anxiety that is already existing because of the pandemic. And it has caused no end of woes for many workers in the banking sector and in the financial services sector, because it's not only banking. It has been happening in credit unions as well. So you can speak about consultation, and the Industrial Relations Act under Section 40 speaks of good faith bargaining. But you see, that has to be qualified. Consultation means a give and a take, a understanding and a reasonable acceptance of what parties have to say and exchange on a table. But if it doesn't happen, then it's unilateral. But then you argue, well, then I had a meeting with the union, and therefore that satisfies as consultation. The union is not interested in the cosmetics. The union is interested in meaningful consultation. And when it is employers have to make these drastic decisions that are going to affect the workforce, what we would have appreciated was that meaningful consultation applied. Now,
before I go to Member Ford, a direct question: how many matters has BIGWU directed to the industrial court? Before I go to Member Ford for the next question to BIGWU.
It would be in the proximity of less than 10, but one of the matters, and it's or two of the matters, one is our OSH offense against Republic Bank, one is another unilateral implementation of our return to work policy, again with Republic Bank. Those matters affect over 3,000 workers in one swoop. And we cannot escape that we live in an enclosed environment. And when it is a company with the strength and size of Republic Bank takes that type of action, there's no doubt in my mind that other companies are waiting with bated breath to see what happens so that they can follow suit. So it's very important, you see, the type of precedents that are set, especially in unionized environments like this, where there is a specific legal duty to not only meet, but to bargain in good faith before these decisions are taken. Because if that had happened, we could have averted going to the industrial court. Now that matter is not going to be heard until the 1st and 10th of February. So you have workers now in Republic Bank who are receiving warning letters for not being vaccinated and not providing a PCR test, which they can't afford. And if you follow the bank's timeline as to how it is they're going to treat with these workers, those workers will be possibly suspended in January before the court date in February. So it has a significant effect.
So are these 10 matters taken to the district court all in relation to workers who have been mandated to be vaccinated by the institution you identified?
Issues surrounded COVID, it may be different things in terms and conditions and so, but a significant amount affects unvaccinated workers. And
so workers have been threatened with termination if they have not been vaccinated.
Sorry, beg pardon?
Workers have been threatened with termination if they have not been vaccinated or could not provide proof of vaccination.
Yes, warning letters on the 29th of November, 2021, Republic Bank would have began its mandate to issue warning letters to unvaccinated workers who have not provided PCR tests and who simply can't afford to.
How many workers would have written to the union in response to that mandate?
We are in the process of data collection because, like I said, that happened on the 29th of November. And thus far, it's somewhere between 300 and 100.
Thank you. Member Ford, go ahead, please.
All right, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Johnson and the gentleman who just spoke, what's his name, Chairman? The comrade who just spoke, what's his name?
Mr. Brown, Jason
Mr.
Brown.
Brown and Mr. Johnson.
Right. Yeah, I know he said a lot. I know this is really not my form of questioning because I know member Senator Avinash Singh brought it up with regards to the vaccination. But in all that you all have said, what are your suggestions to Republic Bank? Could you just get a quick synopsis? How can we, during a pandemic, regularize the situation? Quickly, a quick point. Amidst all that you all have.
Well, before the vaccination, there were three main things, the 3 W's: wash your hands, watch your distance, and wear a mask, right? One of the things that we have criticized Republic Bank for is that they are selectively picking what it is they want to do in terms of vaccination, in terms of contraction and prevention and that sort of a thing. For instance, they have not mandated strictly the distancing, the social distancing of 6 feet apart. They have conveniently, or to their own convenience, turned a blind eye to some of that in some instances. So one of the things we are telling them is, listen, even before the vaccination, there were 3 W's. Do not cherry pick which ones you want to use. The other thing is, do not force people or threaten people to take the vaccination. Continue to engage them and educate them and hear what it is they have to say. Because you see, you cannot run away from this virus. This virus was born in obscurity.
Brown, right? Comrade Brown, how are we to save lives?
Okay, let me just indicate, if I could, Mr. Ford, that I did say earlier that the union would have worked with the umbrella trade union bodies, and we would have presented not just BIGWU, but we would have presented collectively a risk assessment that was done with us experts by to both the Employers Consultative Association and to the chambers, and we have shared it with employers as necessary, which shows whether workers are vaccinated or unvaccinated, the processes that can be used to ensure that you have a safe, a relatively safe workplace. So that is a comprehensive risk assessment document. I can't go into too much of the details now, but we would have done that, and it would have been presented as showing how we can operate, whether with vaccinated or unvaccinated workers. So,
okay,
so
that's available. We wouldn't try to justify that, but again, daily we hear the Ministry of Health and the protocols from the local media and international media with regards to the percentages unvaccinated versus vaccinated and the hospital.
Member Ford, if I can interrupt. Member Ford, while I understand the dialogue you're trying to initiate, I don't think that's the forum. This is the forum to engage the union in whether or not the mandatory vaccination is the way to go. So let's move on from that.
Right. Pandemic leave, right? We identify the pandemic leave versus whatever leaves we have. All right. And again, right, yes, we did not reach the stage of the pandemic leave, but again, through the government, the public service, individuals went home, received their full salary. Again, I don't know with regards to some of the private sectors, how they would have operated. And then we also mentioned, Mr. Brown, about the national insurance system, which is to say that once you are registered, contributing to the system, you go home without salary, you would then qualify for the sickness benefit, as we all well know. So those are topics that we don't necessarily need to get into. But my line of questioning, actually, I want to go to the point of, with regards to your submission, which stated the union is monitoring the practicality of work from home or remote work arrangements on an ongoing basis. Right? This is stated in your submission, Objective 1, Question 3, page 4. And my question is, have any of your members reported any challenges related to work from home or remote work arrangements implemented by your employers? And then the second question is, what type of guidance, advice has your union provided to its members with regard to work from home or remote work arrangements as stipulated by some of your organizations? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thanks again for that question. Just to say that our union would have done, and along with JTAM, a work from home paper on work from home, which would have looked at the pros and cons, because yes, there are advantages or apparent advantages of working from home, but there are also challenges that we would have looked at. And some of those would have come up, for example, the issue of resources that a worker might have at home. The tendency is to assume that once you give a worker a computer, a laptop, and a phone, a mobile phone, that basically means that they can work from home. But we have to consider a number of things. I mean, the internet security, internet bandwidth. Just on this particular call, I can recognize that there are differences in. So when you put a worker to work from home, and they have a package for their whatever, their flow, their cable, etc., and you have a whole amount of data that they have to access. What we find sometimes is that because of the level of bandwidth or internet facility the worker has, that it may not always be practical. Then you have security arrangements, both in terms of the data and also the potential issues of confidentiality, especially within the finance sector, where information is being shared over workers' home internet system, etc., which may not necessarily have all the levels of security or encryption as necessary. So it does open the workers, we have found in some areas, to what potential challenges or even disciplinary processes if it is data is compromised or by a third party. So that is an area that one has to look at. The whole issue of okay, so workers are working from home, but they also have school. School is often in the main, so that there are a number of complications working from home. How does a worker operate? In some areas internationally, we have shown where if a company is going to push for work from home arrangement on an ongoing basis, even here in the Caribbean, First Caribbean International Bank wants to move to, and we represent those workers, and they want to move largely to work from home. But are you going to, what about a workstation or a desk, etc.? These are things that we need to look at, or some kind of one-off payment to ensure that, and to allow workers to acquire the appropriate level of a desk and chair, that type of thing. We have workers working from home on a bed, workers working in their porch, in their gallery, in their kitchen, in their living room, and they have a child right across who is also schooling. We have workers from home where the home has 1 or 2 devices, but you have 3 or 4 children, and etc. So that there are a number of issues that you face when you have this work from home arrangement. Competition for resources, competition for space, the possibility of compromise of data, because people who are hearing your conversation, you're a bank worker, you're talking on the phone, but other people in your home are hearing your conversations regarding a customer's private affairs.
But have the banks offered guidelines to employees regarding all these legal liability issues with work from home, just the same as you have identified before, the situation with the risks of not being vaccinated or being vaccinated, and that discussion from working from home and having to focus on home issues during the height of the pandemic, which can be now considered now, and also persons' internet allowance and all those issues that would have come up as the private sector and public sector transitioned in emergency mode. Have those guidelines been issued by the employer?
What we have found in many instances, Mr. Chair, because of the unprecedented nature of this pandemic and the need for expediency, is that very often the cart has come before the horse. So that
while I hear this unprecedented, and it is unprecedented, we're 18 months in, almost 2 years. So we can't be still using unprecedented and emergency as caveats for not having policy and guidelines at this stage, to me.
Yes, and I agree. And we, as I said, we would have given it's something that we are working with. We have given our recommendations. As I said, this union has produced a paper with all our observations on the pros and cons, because we are not saying it's a totally bad thing, but we are saying to all employers, this is what we have observed, which might be good. These are the areas of concern or challenges, and we would like you to address these matters. We know with some institutions, as I said, like with First Caribbean, they are looking at it, and they have developed a comprehensive policy. That is, at best, I would say, a work in progress. It's not a perfect situation at the moment, but we are prepared to dialogue with employers in order to ensure that it is gotten right. But it's not, I can't say that I've seen comprehensive work from home policies. If that's the question you're asking, I can't say. Maybe Mr. Brown can indicate, but I haven't seen anyone except from 1 or 2 institutions that we deal with at this moment.
We are 30 minutes out of ending, and we would be remiss of us not to include the other stakeholders. Member Naked, we're moving now to the Aviation, Communication and Allied Workers Union. Member Naked, your questions, please.
My first question for the union would be, is your union satisfied with the policy proposals, guidelines, and advisory services that are being provided by the MOL, Ministry of Labor, to stakeholders in response to the unique industrial relations issues generated by this COVID-19?
To answer, the brief answer to your question is no. In terms, as I pointed out in the introductory remarks, one of the things with respect to the payment of certain grants and so on. There have been people who have applied for the grants, and to date, they have not received any grants. I would also want to point out that there are some other issues, and when I had my hand up, I wanted to know whether, in fact, because in the interest, and it would be directed to the chair, because in the interest of saving time, I was wondering if the committee, because there are a number of things, for instance, while people are laid off, they may not be paying their health insurance, they may not be paying, let's say, NIS contributions, and they may be interfering with vacation, etc. And I was wondering whether, in fact, because of the fact that people are losing, let's say, benefits and so on, and if it falls in the realm of for unions to do, let us say, collective bargaining on their own, some may gain, some may not gain. And I was wondering whether, in fact, if the committee can perhaps set up some minimum guidelines with respect to these issues, so that there would be some give and take that they would see. It's not that everyone agree with it, or it can be massaged and so on, with respect to the losses, and whether in fact would be some formula for reimbursements as we come out of the pandemic. So that in terms of answering your question, I think that these are some of the things that that need to be addressed, and I can say that we're not satisfied because we particularly have been at the losing end of the stick.
Well, then the natural follow-up question, Mr. Farmer, would be, what have you done to address the issue if you're not satisfied? What have you done?
Well, we have coordinated with the umbrella bodies like JTAM and NATUC and so on. And we have also, we have also, I provided some response on that, but we have also found the pavement with some members, going to find out from at the various bodies, etc. And the answers that we got was that the grants have been approved, but the funds were not available, and that is where we are. I think that we did, although I was trying to put my hand on it, but if I do, I think that we did write one of the ministries or the Minister of Finance with respect to it, but we got no response. I don't want to say that that we were involved in terms of attempting to satisfy the concerns and so on of our members.
Mr. Farmer, that's extremely interesting. You said that you submitted, your workers submitted and they were approved, but they were told that there were no funds available. I've been on this committee, and that hasn't come out to light. That we haven't heard that before. That grants, we've heard that people have received grants.
That is what the experience has been, and that is what came back to us from some of the members, and that is what we got when we visited the offices of the ministries that's supposed to provide the various grants.
And so you were told that the funds were not yet made available by the Ministry of Finance.
Yes, and to date, as far as I know, the workers have not gotten any relief as a result of the applications.
Then to the chair, maybe you can get it on this. I don't think we've had such an answer yet. And in our time of speaking with the stakeholders, did we hear anyone say that the Ministry of Finance had not provided funds? We haven't heard that yet.
I haven't heard that before. I have heard there were challenges in processing. I have heard there were challenges in some compliance issues. I have heard there were some communication issues with some persons who applied, but I haven't heard what has been identified here. Following up on your question, Member Naked, to Mr. Farmer, in terms of CAL, because you represent some 500 CAL workers, You started earlier on with your introduction by identifying what you described as an arbitrary methodology used by CAL to determine who worked, who didn't work. It didn't seem like a last in, first out situation. Could you give us a sense of what has transpired with CAL workers? Have there been actually the percentage of retrenchment, if any, because CAL's routes had been curtailed during the pandemic, and how this has affected the workers you employ? What percentage of workers have been significantly affected? How many have been taken back up since CAL started back to fly again? And what the prospect is moving forward in terms of whether or not these workers have been given any assurances moving forward or not?
Well, we had been advocating from the very beginning that there should be some form of rotation in order to establish some equity among the workers. The company absolutely refused to do any rotation at all. When it reached the ministry and they eventually decided that it would be a consideration, they instituted a hands-off approach. What they said was that because of the fact it would require, they said that it would require a recognized majority union, and that's something that's in the court that we're attempting to deal with. They're saying that the workers who are employed will have to give up a space to the people. So they applied a hands-off situation to it with respect to the rotation, which we thought was unfair.
I don't understand what that means. What you just said, the workers would have to apply. Clarify that first. What does that mean? And which workers would that apply to?
Yeah, well, for instance, with the flight attendants, whom it affected to a large extent, those who were working were supposed to give up their jobs so that those who were laid off would be able to get a job, and that, you know, didn't cut it. They knew that it would not be. And apart from that, they were saying that there would have to be, in terms of the voting, 100% acceptance in order for it to work. So that they knew that it would not work, and it was not genuine consultations in terms of resolving the situation at the ministry. In terms of people going back, I understand by about the 15th that most of the people who would be laid off would be back at work.
Had there been any discussion on, because I know the term furloughed was used quite a lot internationally, and in some instances internationally, furloughed meant an arrangement was made or was agreed to between the employer, the union, and the employees for, if the entity returned to some level of profitability, the remunerations lost may have been recouped at some point. Has there been any discussion in that regard? Or is that now water under the bridge and then we move forward from here? Or has that conversation been initiated at all between the union and CAL?
That conversation was never initiated. It was never had. And even though we would have put forward some type, because we knew nothing about furlough in terms of being part of the dialogue in Trinidad and Tobago. We proposed something along the lines of the RSBA, where you would have, so therefore, before it becomes the 3 months that they were saying, that you move those people who were working and you put a new set of people in. But it's just that the company just refused. They did it for a while in Jamaica. Were the measures instituted for example, you mentioned flight attendants, initiated across all levels of the organization? So was it employees, ground level employees, mid-management, management across the board, or was it only a particular cadre of employees? No, in terms of the last in, first out, we know of 4 people who came to us, I think 3 or 4 people, 2 or 3 people, who were supposed to have been promoted. They were not promoted. So that in terms of the layoff, they perhaps should have gone back to their substantive positions, and they should have gone back to the substantive positions, but that was not done. And the workers and they were laid off while you had junior people working in their place or filling their roles and keeping their jobs. In some cases, in one case that I know of, there was a guy who had cancer and he had been at home. And when he came back, they had put him in a different department and he had asked to work from home. They absolutely refused to allow him to work from home because of his immunocompromised situation. And he remains out as a matter of fact, having to face. And as a matter of fact, he was on vacation. And when he came back out from vacation, one of the guys who worked in his department actually got COVID. And he came.
What we don't want to do is personalize it to that level of who. Yeah, so we want to stay away from that sort of direct personalization in serious person situation because those may be subject to legal issues down the road. So we want to stay away from that sort of thing. Member Ford, do you have a question for Mr. Farmer?
I'll pass it on, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Farmer, in your submission, the union stated you received 140 complaints of persons whose applications for salary relief grants were approved. How did this, has this been resolved from the representation you provide? And are these payments still outstanding in terms of the processing of these employees that you represent? And I think Member Mohit has a question, if I'm not mistaken.
As far as we know, none of the applications were satisfied. None. We don't have actual copies of the applications, but these were as a result of people who would have been laid off. That we know that they're saying that none of them had received any sort of relief from the government to date.
Mr. Naimi?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Member Mohit.
Mr. Chair, in terms of these approved grants for persons who would not have received their grants, would this be under the Ministry of Finance alone in terms of the NIS salary relief grant payments, or does this include social development grants as well, income support?
Mr. Farmer?
Yes, as far as I understand, it would be income support grants by the Ministry of Social Welfare, whatever the name of the ministry is.
Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. Mr. Naimi, Member Mohit, you have another question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's it.
Okay, Mr. Naimi, I see your hand is up. Do you have an intervention or a question?
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
I have an intervention. I've heard enough to make a statement beyond representing the TTMA, but to really speak for the business sector. One of the things that we reflect back on the impact of the pandemic, what became glaring is the lack of a social safety net by having in place a NIS unemployment relief program. And I know that we are running out of time, and I would certainly not want to lose the opportunity to make this statement. And it crosses literally almost everything I've heard to date. Beginning with an NIS that is incentivized with an unemployment relief program will garner greater acceptance and enrollment by the population, just to start off. And secondly, I'm sure the best intentions for the ad hoc grant system that was instituted through the Ministry of Social Development was the best efforts by everyone. But it led to a simple point. They were overwhelmed. And I think that we should learn from this episode of pandemic to.
But from your perspective, as the head of the TTMA, the Ministry of Labor last time we convened indicated the manufacturing sector was one of the hardest hit sectors, which means that your membership would have seen or needed a lot more intervention in some cases than other sectors. How have they fared, and how is... That's not so?
That's not so, sir. No,
correct me,
I'm here to move beyond manufacturing. We're still on track to double our manufacturing output by 2025. We are resilient. We are okay. We've had to remodel and do a lot of new things. Literally, we're in a world now where everything we do actually, we're it now virtually, and we are now into an industrial 4.0 generation. So the manufacturing resilient, we are there. I'm not here much to, yes, I can a little time commending on Mr. Joseph sector, go home to sanitizers and signage, and we reacted very quickly to and contributed to your question. Going back to this point, we have, as the business community, have to say we're ready to make our contribution into an unemployment relief program matched by the staff. And as the chair of the Standing Committee for Trade dealing with the COTED and CARIFORM and EPA issues, I see absolutely no problem in funding this with the NIS through the European grants. So it's a missing part of our social safety net that exposed our most vulnerable to, we all know it, depending on their families to get through this.
So you think a more formalized approach needs to be taken, including European grants?
Just interpose what I've just said to everything I just heard. This malfunctioning, this not responding, this not happening. Yes, it's all because it's an ad hoc mechanism we just created to accommodate a pandemic. Of course, what's expected? Okay, things are now getting back to some normal. I understand that the Ministry of Social Development has actually got their wheels turning. You know, they had to even deal with multiple applications of the same person. All of a sudden, they were absorbed into a vortex they were never developed for. And you know what? Give them kudos. Because I wouldn't have expected anybody, anywhere to pull this off. And it's a gap. And I would like to posit that statement that I made regarding the review of the NIS, start off actuarially and build a program that allows the business community and the labor force to work together and apply a meaningful contribution.
Thank you. We're going to go.
Chairman, let me, before we sign off on Mr. Nair.
Go ahead, Member Nakid.
I had a chance to look at what he submitted with the charts and so, and I thought it was something very instructive and other sectors, other industries could use to indicate quite clearly which workers have been affected and which have not been affected. So if anybody gets a chance to look at that, but I'll go back to Mr. Farmer, who I thank you, Mr. Farmer, for being so forthright in your presentation, because we have got information from you that we haven't got before. So I'd just like to ask you a follow-up question. Your submission indicated to us that there are about 47 retrenchment matters not reported to the Ministry of Labor, in which the union actually asked the Ministry of Labor to intervene. However, your union until now has received no response. You spoke about that before. Can you tell us when did your union make that request? And what was the follow-up? Do you have that information?
I don't have the exact date, but it would have been subsequent to the exercise that was done, I think, around the end of June or the end of July. But I can always forward the date and the communication to the committee.
That would be wonderful, Mr. Farmer. So let me take that onus off you and go to the Ministry of Labor. Let me ask the Ministry of Labor, who's the representative here. Have you received the request from the union, from the aviation union, to intervene in the matter, first of all?
Thank you, member. I will ask my Chief Labor Relations Officer, Mr. Dino Gomez, to respond to your question.
All right, so the information is not available, so I'll ask you this then.
No, she didn't say it's not available. She's referring to her colleague.
Her colleague is present. Okay, sorry, Ms. Willis. I thought she was. Thank you.
No. Good morning, good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members of the committee. With respect to the question from Mr. Farmer dealing with ACAWU, I cannot say whether or not, but I know that the matter with respect to the retrenchment of the workers of CAL, that was conciliated upon in the ministry. So maybe he could shed some more light. I don't know if those are the matters you're referring to, Mr. Farmer?
No, the question was with respect to the request for intervention by the Minister of Labor.
Correct.
And we got no response. We got no response on that particular letter. But what I observed from the ministry, what I observed that happens at the ministry, is that when it comes to certain things that they seem to think happen to be sensitive, they will always ask for additional information and keep asking for all sorts of additional information and never come up, let us say, with even acceptance of the report. And that there's one particular issue that I know of that has been going on maybe since May or June this year. I think it has been going on for some time, and it's something that I intend to address at some point, so that if it is that the ministry thinks that it cannot deal with the particular problem, then perhaps what needs to be done is that it's referred to the court and let the court decide.
All right.
Good people. Go ahead, Ms. Gomez.
If I can respond now with respect to the issue with ACAWU, and it has to do with I'm not sure if he has a specific question, but with respect to ACAWU, there was the issue of successorship. When BIGWU changed to Caribbean Airlines, and there was the amalgamating with Air Jamaica.
Okay, Ms. Gomez?
Yes.
Put a pause. This is not the remit of this committee. Those issues you can resolve with Mr. Farmer privately. Okay? We are running out of time, and while I appreciate the opportunity for groups and entities to resolve the issues, this is not the forum for that. Okay, I'm going to go now, finally, because we have Mr. Prentice here and we haven't gotten a chance to deal with him yet. Mr. Prentice, apologies for not getting to you earlier on, but can you give us a sense of the entities you represent from Amalgamated Workers Union, and what has been your experience with your charges during the pandemic? And we are going to ask you to be concise, please. Apologies for that. Okay, that's okay. We represent the workers at the Bermuda's Biscuit Company. We also represent the workers at Eastside and New City Mall. We represent workers at Royal Castle. We represent workers at the Port of Spain Corporation. Some of the challenges that we would have had mainly would have come from the biscuit company, Bermuda's Biscuit Company, and also from Royal Castle. The challenges there would have stemmed from the fact that Royal Castle would have been actually closed, because Royal Castle would not have been one of those entities that would have looked upon as essential
in NAT up to that point. And the union had to make numerous amount of intervention as it relates to how the management of that entity treat and deal with Royal Castle issues as it relates to the workers being at home. The workers had some incentive that was in existence, and eventually at one point it was stopped. The company engaged really in terms of trying to deal with outside entities to get some of the products out there on the market as it relates to selling the food and so on, the chicken and so on, and not actually depending on the workers within the industry. We had challenges as it relates to Bermuda's biscuit company. We would have a lot of dialogue with the company in terms of developing a plan that would have helped the workers that is in the casual pool of workers, because you would have the regular workers while we would have made some adjustment in terms of the working hours in order to keep the doors of the entity open to provide the nation with food. The reality was we had difficulties dealing with those that was on contract type of work and so on, which would have allowed the company to function under normal circumstances, but changes had to be made. So we did make some progress in that regard, but the biggest challenge for us all was Royal Castle, the suffering of the Royal Castle workers and the problems that they would have faced, and we would have at one time suspended even the union dues, and unions depend on union dues in order to carry out the business on a daily basis. And we took a principal position at that time to suspend the union dues so workers would not have been allowed to pay dues at that point in time. We still have matters. We try to settle our matters bilaterally outside of the court, and we still have some of those existing at the moment.
All right, I'm going to give the final question to Member Mohit, to Mr. Prentice from the Amalgamated Workers Union. Member Mohit.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Chair, if we can have this question answered in terms of the estimated number of persons awaiting the grant payments, and I'll add this in the interest of time. What type of representation did your union make to the relevant ministries on behalf of these workers concerning these outstanding grant payments?
Mr. Chair, what really happened as it relates to the representation for workers who would have applied for the grant? Yes, we do have some outstanding. I don't have the numbers as we speak now, but we could provide you with those numbers. But it is mainly in the two both fast food industries, the Bermuda's Biscuit Company and the Royal Castle area, for which some members, especially the Royal Castle area, which would have applied for the grant, and today they have not received any such support. So we can provide you all, the committee, with the information as it relates to that number.
Can you state for us, Mr. Chair, one additional question? Can you just state for us whether the grants being mentioned by your entity would be, the percentages in terms of, based on your conversation with persons or reporting system, whether these grants applications would have been made to social development or the Ministry of Finance for the salary relief grants?
They would have been made to social development.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman, in addition, I believe that most of these mentioned were under the Social Development Ministry, and I think that it's a serious concern, and I'd just like to place that on the record. Since for some time now, it has been a concern in terms of grants being approved and funds not being available.
All right, thank you, Member Mohit. Thank you, Mr. Prentice. Unfortunately, we're out of time. There's another JSC scheduled for 1 o'clock. So this time we're going to have to wrap up. I'm going to invite the heads of the delegations to provide their closing comments, starting with the Acting Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Labor, Ms. Willis.
Thank you, Chair. And once again, to say thank you to inviting us to this morning's session. We look forward to the outcomes of the deliberation of the committee in terms of the information that has been provided. We recognize from the discussion that there are some issues that the ministry would need to address, but we continue to encourage persons to seek advice from the Ministry of Labor in terms of their matters. Whether it be employers or trade unions, continue to seek that advice from our Conciliation, Advocacy and Advisory Division. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. It's interesting you say that, because it seems that some of the advice being sought over the last two interfaces we had have not been as forthcoming from the ministry, especially in terms of guidance on work from home policy. I know the vaccination policy, you said is before the cabinet in terms of a paper, but very often the private sector waits for the state sector to lead the way, so to speak. And if the guidance is not there, then you find the ad hoc approaches start taking place. And then everything ends back up with the Ministry of Labor for conciliation and sometimes to the industrial court. So you see, when the ministry is not as efficient in terms of advising, it leads to issues down the road.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. But with regard to the work from home policy, yes, our Industrial Relations Advisory Committee would have put out guidelines, which we will have shared on our social media pages for employers to look at, as well as trade unions. The responsibility from the work from home policy is currently right now being addressed by the Ministry of Planning and Development, and we are working with that ministry in terms of that issue.
Thank you. And if you could just supply for us, because we didn't get a chance to ask you, you gave quite a comprehensive account, your colleague that is, of the persons who would have lost jobs and the net job gains in certain sectors. If you could supply for us the recovery of jobs since the country reopened from your data set, that would be helpful to the committee.
Yes, we will provide that, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Willis. Next we move to the TTMA, Mr. Naimi, sorry.
Well, it's been a pleasure to engage and to have the forum of such eminence, and would be remiss to not say to them that the business community wants to find the win-wins moving forward. What's happened there?
Thank you, Mr. Naimi. Did you finish?
No, I think I had a glitch. I would like to add another sentence.
Go ahead, please.
Again, just to make my case study, that Royal Castle matter. Hello? Are you hearing me now?
We're hearing you. Go ahead, please.
Sorry. Even the Royal Castle matter, with an unemployment relief program predicating all of this, would not have been absorbing the unions and the companies at this time. And we need to get a more national alignment of messaging to get through this. Yes, one of the bugbears in what I heard was the cost of PCR testing for people who are anti-vaxxers to get through this.
Thank you, Mr. Naimi. We go now to Mr. Johnson, General Secretary of the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union. Mr. Johnson.
Yes, thank you again, Chair, and thanks to to this committee for engaging us and giving us the opportunity to share our experiences. Our trade union continues on a daily basis to deal both with our members in what is called our recognized majority units, where we have membership. But what we have also observed during this period is that, which we didn't get a chance to address, is that a number of what we call walk-ins, people who may not necessarily belong to unions, but they face issues, and they come into our offices for guidance or for cases to be dealt with. And we have noticed quite an increase in that area, which suggests there are quite a number of workers out there who have issues where they may not be in a unionized institution, but they do need to have representation as well. So that's also an area that has been engaging our attention. And I know, just to end with a question I know Mr. Ford did ask, in terms of what did unions do to assist their members. And I just want to end by indicating that our union certainly as well did take a number of personal initiatives, hampers, and because food is a key issue that we found people needed at this time. So wherever the most vulnerable of our members, once a need was identified, we did seek to assist them in that regard. And we also did provide digital devices to several schools in remote areas where, as part of our social responsibility in this pandemic. So that those are areas that we continue to look at, and our union will continue to be proactive as we deal with the industrial relations and employment issues arising out of this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Johnston. You raised a really good point about persons who don't fall within the formal representation category. And if you could supply a report on any of the stakeholders, if there's anything you think you would have liked to submit, you can supply it in writing to the Secretary. We'd appreciate that greatly. And if you could supply a report on those walk-ins in parentheses, it would be helpful in capturing that category of persons who would have been affected but may not have been contemplated.
Yes, certainly, Chair, we will do.
Thank you. Mr. Edgehill of the TNT Coalition of Services Industries.
Thank you, Chair. Again, thank you very much, yourself and the members of the committee, for giving TTCSI the opportunity to participate this morning and for inviting us to this meeting. We do look forward to further collaboration and consultations with you all, and to facilitating the provision of data for guidance in terms of the decision-making process that you'll have on your hands. So thank you again, and we look forward to more discussion.
Thank you. We're looking forward to that report from your CEO, Ms. Gayadeen, in terms of the data collection and analysis that you said should be completed by year's end.
Perfect, thank you.
It can be submitted to the Secretary. Thank you so much. Mr. Farmer of the Aviation, Communication and Allied Workers Union. Mr. Farmer, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. We want to say thanks for the intervention and the invitation to submit our concerns and our comments. We also want to confirm that we will send the requested information, which would be to you. And we look forward to the committee's recommendations in the final report.
Thank you. And any other information you have, please feel free to forward it to the Secretariat.
Certainly will do.
Thank you. And Mr. Prentice of the Amalgamated Workers Union. Go ahead, please, Mr. Prentice. Mr. Prentice, you're muted. Could you unmute your mic, please? Thank you. You're still muted, Mr. Prentice.
Yeah. You hear me?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Okay. I also would like to thank the you, Mr. Chair, and to the rest of the committee for inviting the Amalgamated Workers Union to this important discussion and at this point in time. One thing I would just like to leave with you all today, and I hope when the plans are going forward that the sanitation industry in this country, especially during a time as a pandemic, must be looked at seriously in terms of the importance and the essential contribution that can be made to the sanitation industry, and have the industry being highly respected as against what is existing today. While we have in the corporation, a certain standard is put out there, we can't say the same for the private sector. We would like to see the private sector come on board in terms of the level of lifting that level of the work that is done in the industry. Thank you very much.
And we'd appreciate if you could give us a sense of what has been the effect of the pandemic on sanitation workers who would have been front and center in a more exposed way all the way through the pandemic. They didn't have any rest or respite from this. So we'd appreciate a report from you if you can.
I will most definitely.
Thank you so much, Mr. Prentice. I'd like to thank all stakeholders for their participation in this interaction, the one before, in these important deliberations, committee members for their continued support and participation, the staff and secretariat, the Office of the Parliament for your procedural and logistical support, and of course our viewing and listening audience for your comments and your participation. This is our last public meeting for 2021. So we'd like to take this time to also wish you and the rest of the country a safe, enjoyable Christmas. Please, if you have no medical reason not to, I'm going to put myself out there and say, please be vaccinated. And a bright, safe, and prosperous new year. Please continue to adhere to all COVID-19 rules, regulations, and stipulations, and be safe. This meeting is now adjourned.
Recording stopped.